we're forgotten about. Like they'll look and they'll speak about students a lot of the time. Graduates will get a little bit of airtime in the news. After that point, no one really picks you up unless you're like probably like having kids or a parent. Like there's a real big gap in there.
Welcome back to another episode of Girls Know Nothing. This podcast episode is actually a little bit of a twist, as I appeared on our next guest podcast almost 2 years ago now. Gaby Mendes is the founder of the award-winning Twenties podcast and media platform. The platform is aimed at educating 20-somethings on things that you need to know in adult life that you just weren't taught in schools. So welcome to the studio, Gaby. Welcome to my studio. It's very, very weird to have the shoe on the other foot, because when we first met, I was in your studio.
You were, yeah.
Looked very different how I did back then. But I can't believe that was almost 2 years ago.
I know, time flies, isn't it?
That clip that I put on my TikTok from our episode still gets so many comments on, and it still circulates LinkedIn now, so it just blows my mind. And I'm kind of got a little bit of FOMO when I see your podcast now, like how big it's got and how much it's grown. I'm like, damn, why didn't I do it now?
Come back on, we'll have you round two.
Hi guys, I'm back again. just for the fact of going to Liverpool, to be honest. Yeah. I think that's the best part. But you know, I feel like you know so much about me from having me on your podcast, but I don't feel like I know that much about you apart from the podcast. So, you know, before Talk 20s, tell me a bit about you. Like, what were you doing before Talk 20s?
Yeah, so I graduated from university, and not gonna lie, I had absolutely zero idea what I wanted to do with my career. I was like one of those people where I was like, oh, I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know what subjects to take. I just didn't know. Some people do. They're like, they want to be a doctor. Great, fine, follow all those qualifications. I didn't know. So I don't know if you remember doing these, but back in sixth form, where you do like a quiz, and the quiz at the end of it tells you what career you should go into. And every single time I did one of those quizzes, it was like, you should be a teacher. You should be a teacher. You should be a teacher. So all these things I was ticking was leading me to teaching. And my mum was like, I think you'd be a really good teacher. She'd wanted to be one and never got around to doing it. And she was like, I think you should go and do it. It's a really like great career and stuff. So reluctantly, but like also kind of found an interest in it. I did end up going down the teaching route, and I ended up after university going into secondary school teaching. And I just knew straight from the off, I was like, it wasn't something that I think is something you have to do with teaching. It's something you have to put your heart and soul into. You have to want to do it from the very beginning. And because I was umming and ahhing so much, I just knew when I got there that my heart wasn't fully in it. I did it for 2 years. And whilst I was in my second year of teaching, I got given a sixth form group of students. So I was like 21, 22 at this time. And they were like 17, 18. Yeah. So it's like a 4-year age gap. And it was ridiculous that I even got put in this position. I don't think they were aware of my age. I think they just saw like Miss Mendes. Oh yeah, great. She'll go for sixth form, and then paired me up with them. And it was both like a blessing in disguise. It was both like a blessing and a curse, really, because basically I ended up dressing like a grandma for a whole year, because whenever a teacher used to come into the classroom, genuinely, they would look around because I would just blend in. So the only way I could not blend in was to dress like, a really like grandma teacher. So I used to do that. But I think on the blessing side of things is that they really opened up to me. It was loads of conversations that we used to have about life skills. Like, they wouldn't ask me questions about what they were studying, like their A-levels. They would ask me questions like, how do I get like a debit card or a credit card? Or what's it like moving out for the first time? Or my mental health isn't great. Like, how do I do this? Or what subject should I choose for my career? And I was like, once you leave school, and even school doesn't set people up for good life skills, to be honest, but like once you leave, there is genuinely nothing. And at that moment in time, I was really struggling myself. I was really suffering with really bad anxiety and stress, because I just knew I wasn't in a career that I loved. So I did 2 years in teaching, and then was like, I know I've got quite a business head on my shoulders. Even though I've gone down this education path, I really do feel like there's some stuff that's just not, some of my skills that just aren't being used by the fact that I was teaching, and nothing in teaching is to do with business. So I was like, let's kind of move into a business setting. Went and started working in the events industry, did a couple of years doing that, and launched what I thought would be an events company for young people that would help with all of these life skills. And then COVID hit. So my second career got completely scuppered by COVID. So I was in the events industry, and obviously nobody could meet in person. So it was like, what do I do? I can still do the mission of Talk 20s by starting a podcast. And then that's where it all began.
So was Talk 20s what the events company would be as well? So that's how
Yeah, so Talk 20s was supposed to be an events company. It was supposed to be a large scale event. So the events job that I went into and what inspired me growing up, I don't know if you ever remember, do you remember the Close Show Live that used to happen in Birmingham? So as a kid, I've always been to those shows growing up. My mum used to take me from about the age of 11, we used to go. And honestly, this just fascinated me. I thought it was the best thing. I'd look forward to it every single year. And then I went to the University of Birmingham, and the Close Show is held at the NEC in Birmingham. So then when I was at university, I worked at the show. So I used to sell eyebrow makeup and all that kind of stuff at the show. And I loved it. It doesn't exist anymore, which is so rubbish. I think it finished 2016 or 2017. It was a while back now, maybe even a bit later than that. But I loved it. And I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if there was an event for young people that felt really cultural, really enjoyable, but also at the same time a little bit educational at the same time. So that's what I wanted Talk 20s to be. And I was only going to start off small, like a really small event. And even that didn't obviously take off, but the podcast did. And then now we're 3 years in and we're thinking about launching that for real with 20s Fest. But I'm glad that I did it this way around in the end anyway.
So when you were saying that every test you did came back for you being a teacher, I was sat there thinking, I thought you'd make a really good teacher. So even speaking to you, I actually could see that. But it's weird that you had a nice, well, it's not weird. It's nice that you had a nice experience with some of the teenagers you were teaching, because teachers in my school, especially male teachers in my school, that didn't have that bigger age gap between the sixth formers, got eaten absolutely alive. But I remember actually thinking back to when I was that age. When we left school, the only reason I knew how to do certain things was because my dad taught me how to do it. But then not everybody has that same luxury. And even when it came to a job application, not a single
Nobody
clue.
teaches us stuff. Nobody teaches you this
and
stuff.
Well, so where apart from the teaching stuff, how did you start your podcast? Because everybody has a podcast now, but yours has got a very good niche, and you have such different range of guests on. How did you decide this is exactly what it's going to be like?
I think it's really evolved over time. I started doing a podcast during COVID across Zoom, in the little tiny box room that it's in my house. And that's how it all started. And I just started interviewing friends, people who I thought were really interesting. And I tried to always put an educational spin on it. So it's always fun. We always have a giggle and a laugh, but you should at the end of it get something out of it that's either educational or helpful to your life in your 20s. And I just felt there was a moment that when I stepped out into adult life, and I just felt so overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that you have to kind of just feel like you know what to do. And quite often when you're thrown into a workplace or other settings, you're not always surrounded by people who are of the same age. When all the way through school, you've probably had people of the same age in your year group the whole time, and then you step into adult life and everyone's all different ages. So I felt I still wanted to bring that community of that age group together, because we all have something in common, and that we're all trying to figure it out. No one's got it all figured out, but we're all trying to get closer to what it is that we want to do. So it was kind of that message that we wanted to convey, and then through each episode we kind of cover off a different topic with, like you say, a wide variety of guests.
What do you think is been the biggest struggle of setting up Talk 20s and trying to get your mission out there?
I think it's tricky because for a long time I was a one-woman band, and I think when you've got a mission that is so big and so vast, you really do need a team behind you to kind of get it out there and get support and stuff like that. So I've been so lucky to have a lot of support from the beginning, but it's really started to pick up traction now that the team is growing and that there's more to the message and the mission than just me, because it's never been about me and my story, and I never really wanted that to be the focus. I was going to start with an event where you wouldn't even know if I was the organizer. That was the whole plan, and accidentally I've just become a podcast host and all of this kind of stuff that I never really expected. But as the team has grown, there's just so much more capacity for that, and I don't ever see it just me being the face. Well, we want other people to kind of come in and host with us as well.
One of the questions, this is something that I personally thought when I was looking at your own content, so I have followed you on social media for quite a while. Obviously, there was a reel or a story that you put up about always having a partner with a stable income so that one of you can go off and do what you wanted to do. Do you think that that's one of the reasons that young people will struggle to go and start off going after things they're passionate about because they're worried about stability, because that's what we're told to have.
A huge privilege that I have is that I've been with my partner since the first year of university, almost coming up for a decade now. Like I'm 28 now. Like that is a long
we are the same age
time.
and I
that is
feel
a
like
long
that.
time. So I've really grown up with him, and he's always been there for me, always incredibly supportive. And that is an unspoken privilege that nobody really talks about. If you're living in a couple where you're sharing the rent, rent's so expensive everywhere nowadays, but if you're splitting that in two fairly, or whoever's, if you split it like by percentages or whatever you do, that's a privilege. Like there's so many of my friends, well, most of my friends are single actually, and they have to cover all of their rent, but they might be living in a space that is pretty much of a similar size to what I'm in, but it's split between two. So there's so much there that I think it prevents people who potentially are single or don't have that support from people around them to go after something like what I've been able to do. And I do owe a lot to Dan for that situation. And now we're in a position where he's quite entrepreneurial as well, and he wants to launch his own stuff. So now that I'm in more of a stable position, he's able to make moves in his side of things. But for a while, he was the one. He was just like, look, I'll hold down the fort. I call it being the anchor. You're the one that's kind of not just financially as well, also emotionally, because whenever you make a change, there's always peaks and troughs. But I think that's so crucial to doing anything.
Do you think you'd have advice for anyone that doesn't necessarily have an anchor that still wants to pursue things they're passionate about?
I think it's, for me, also creating security. You can create that for yourself as well, and feeling confident. So having a bit of savings to go off, so that if you want to go for something, like when I took the leap and left my events job to run Talk 20s full time, I had built up some savings to see me through, even if I couldn't take a penny of income from what I do. And I think that's really important, and you can definitely do that on your own. So there's definitely ways that you can do it. And I think just be sensible about making decisions. I think we had Jessie who's Mimi Darling Beauty on TikTok, and she talked about she just literally just quit a job randomly, before she ever was big on TikTok, and just didn't really know what she was going to do next. I think said she was going to be a wedding photographer but had no plan or whatever and stuff like that. And I think she was reflecting on that as one of her biggest adulting mistakes. And I think you probably need to have a bit of a think before you start jumping from thing to thing, but it's definitely not impossible. I've seen loads of my friends do it.
What do you think is the biggest thing or best thing you've learned from your guests from Talk 20s?
Oh my God, I learn something new every single week. Every single week I'm so lucky, because I feel especially in the past 3 years, I've developed into someone that's so, I want to say it's not to boast or anything, but it's I'm just so well rounded, because I've heard so many different people's opinions, and I'm sure you feel it too, on life. So I get to absorb all that all the time, and I just feel like a sponge, and I feel it's nice to hear people's perspectives all the time. I'm trying to think. I think one of the things I loved from what you were saying with the whole LinkedIn thing about people's being really transparent with salaries and stuff like that. I think that's a huge discussion that's come out of the podcast. It's been a really positive one. I don't know if you've talked about it much on your podcast before, but every job description should have at least a salary bracket. Don't you think?
No, definitely. To be fair, it's not really something I've spoken about since actually your podcast episode. When it went viral, I think it's one of my most viewed videos still 2 years later, and I was like, wow, people really it's an angry point for some people, because young people always it should be, and then old people are no. And it's now we're seeing loads of stories and articles about young people saying we're not standing for it. We're not going to they don't even apply if they don't have a salary listed.
It takes time to apply for a job. Nobody wants to apply and then get to it and then be like, oh, this is less than I'm earning right now, or I'm not going to be able to live off that salary. But at the same time, I can see the other side of things, where it's it might deter people from applying, but just because they see the figure of that it is or stuff. So it's a tricky one. I think more transparency in job applications would be better overall.
I think my problem is that I'm just too transparent about everything.
Yeah.
So then I just expect everyone else to also be extremely transparent about everything, but they're not. And that's fine, but that's probably my lesson for today, to not expect myself from other people. Now I feel like I'm in therapy.
Yeah.
But don't worry, I won't make this into a therapy session about me. Earlier you were talking about how you wanted to set up Talk Twenties as an events company, and I know something that you were really passionate about talking about on this episode is Talk Twenties Fest?
Twenties Fest.
Twenties Fest. So I actually don't know anything about it apart from briefly hearing about it from your socials. So like, I want to know all about it now. So what is it going to be?
Imagine that you were going to a freshers event at university, right? But it's for graduates. So you leave university and school, and all of a sudden, like, your friendship groups are taken away and you don't get to do fun things like freshers anymore. It's like straight into real adult life. But there are tons of brands and companies that would love to intro you to their brands, or like have stands and stuff like that. There are tons of companies that would help with workshops and amazing speakers and stuff like that. And essentially that is what we're planning: a festival full of goodness, full of workshops, full of speakers, live music to come along that will help you figure out your 20s. So whether you're trying to navigate your career, manage your well-being, improve your finances, there's going to be something for everyone at 20s Fest.
Yeah, see, like, we're the same age, so getting to my late 20s, I feel like I should have everything together and like know everything and know how to do everything. I definitely don't. No, and sometimes, like, I mean, when I look at your socials, like, you said you've been down for a decade, I'm thinking, oh my God, like, I'm not even anywhere close to that. But then you probably look at somebody else in their 20s and think the same thing, right?
100%.
And it's nice to know that I'm not on my own. You're not in feeling that way.
And I think for 20s Fest right now, we've been collecting loads of like pre-registration data. So we've been asking loads of people about what kind of age they are and what are their biggest challenges they're facing in their 20s right now. And right now the survey is saying that 60% of the people that have registered have really worried about their finances in the last year. 57% have had mental health challenges, and 49% have lacked social interaction and have really struggled making new friends in their 20s. That's just 3 things that are really high percentages that are what young people are feeling right now. So if you're like, see yourself in any one of those categories, it's really nice to know that you're not alone. So we're using all of that data that people have told us that they're struggling with, and we will put on specific workshops and sessions and speakers that can specifically help with those things. Plus, we're going to have a really big like friendship element to the event. So, there'll be an opportunity to connect, and we're working with a really cool event partner to connect people whilst they're at the event. So you can actually make friends when you come as well.
So those 3 things kind of sound like they're repercussions of the pandemic. You feel like a lot of young people, especially young people in their 20s, kind of got left behind when it came to support or, the next stages of their life. And do you think that's the reason why we're seeing such high figures of those statistics?
I think we're forgotten about. Like, they'll look and they'll speak about students a lot of the time. Graduates will get a little bit of airtime in the news. After that point, no one really picks you up unless you're like probably like having kids or a parent. Like there's a real big gap in there where people are just like, yeah, get on with life, and we're never really reported on, and nobody's really like pointing us in the right direction. There isn't something that really defines that age group except from this uncertainty, and you're trying to figure out your life. And that is common ground, but it's not enough necessarily for people to be writing articles or news on, because it's not big life occasions, but it is an experience that we're probably all going through. And I think that's what's been really tricky from the other side of COVID is we are all experiencing these things at really high levels, the worries about finances, the worries about our mental health, the worries about like connections, but we're not really being covered in the media or supported or thought about in government at all, because there's other things that I'm guessing finding more important, but everyone's experiencing it. So there should be something out there that is helping solve these problems, because it was kind of, I guess, inevitable, if we spent like pretty much 2 years all sat in our homes, that a lot of these things would come about for young people that are different than other generations at this moment in time.
So this is just me being really nosy now about what brands are going to be at Twenties Fest.
Wow.
What can you tell me that's going to be there at Twenties Fest?
We're in lots of conversations now. We're actually just like signing on the dotted line with a few different things in the venue and stuff like that. So it's all like still really early. So yeah, I can't tell you any specific brands and stuff like that, but a lot of the ones that you'd feel excited about are seeing at Freshers. We're hoping that it will feel like, you know, I said about Clothes Show Live, like you go there for a fun day out. We don't want it to feel like you're going back to school. Like, this is not a corporate event. Like,
networking is the worst thing about work.
We want it to feel really fun. And like, the only way that we can do that is like by collecting this pre-registration data, because I know I talked about the things that people have like really struggled with in the past 3 years, but we've also got what's your biggest success in the past year. And there's people who have got a promotion, they've been traveling for a year, they've got a great achievement at work, they've got engaged, and all these things that, you know, people feel like they make them really happy, or they've got, you know, they've overcome an eating disorder, all of these kind of things, which are amazing. And we'll also be celebrating that. It's not going to be all doom and gloom, because we can't have that, because your life isn't like that in your 20s.
No, exactly. And I think it's just nice to know that there is somebody that's out there looking out for us as a group. I know you always want to be like not necessarily the face of Talk 20s and kind of be a bit more behind the scenes, but, you know, I want to know like how you found it trying to start up all these things and like, you know, find the next big thing as somebody who is trying to also navigate their 20s. Like, what was the biggest struggle for you becoming self-employed and starting this?
I have really struggled. It's not easy starting a business, like, especially when you're like, your vision is like massive and you're like, I want to achieve all these different things, and you've got so many different goals, but you really are one person. And I'm not going to say I'm a person that had a ton of connections in business as well, which I think helps a lot. I've made some really like big mistakes along the way, and like have really struggled at different points. I've tried to surround myself with good people, but not always been successful in that. There's been some weird parts of the business journey that I've been on that I look back now and I'm like, oh my God, I can't even believe I even entertained that. And if I went back again, I would never even entertain those conversations. But at the same time, we wouldn't be where we are right now. So I think for me personally, the journey has been really difficult, and I've had to rely heavily on, you know, getting up each day and just knowing that the mission that I'm trying to do and the team are trying to do is one that is worth fighting for. Because if it were easy, everyone would do it, and it's definitely not easy.
But how do you keep that motivation high? Because when you don't have a routine, or you don't necessarily know what you're getting up for, then it is really, really hard and challenging.
Yeah, I'd just say it's really hard. I think the thing is, I would probably say that for me, there are peaks and troughs. There are some weeks when I'm like, yes, this is the best thing ever. And I think that also, I'll be really honest, comes a lot with like validation. So a podcast episode has done really well, or we've just had a pitch in from a new brand partner that have signed with us, or we've just had loads of great feedback on something else that we're doing. And I think that really helps the momentum, but that doesn't always come all the time. So there will be weeks where the content has not done as well for whatever reason, or you've had a few setbacks or negatives or rejections and stuff like that, and then your motivation just hits the floor, and it's like, how do I even get myself out of that space? So I really do feel like for me, it's just been that roller coaster, and I often, probably too much, spend my time validating what we're doing based off, oh, we've just had this guest say yes, or that episode has just done amazing, or we've just had this many signups for 20s Fest, etc., etc. And I think that's probably the only thing that helps keep me going, which for some people in business, if you've not got that constant feedback loop and you don't have things going in a positive trajectory, that can be really hard. But sometimes it goes not in the right direction, and then you're like, oh, what's going on?
So when it's not going in the right direction, what do you do for yourself to kind of get yourself back on track?
I would probably say that I spend more time focusing on myself. That seems like a kind of the opposite thing to do. You probably want to like invest heavily in your business, like what's going wrong, like let's fix the business stuff. But I think sometimes for me, taking a step away and actually just having a bit of space from it actually is better for my brain. It brings about more creativity. It brings about a different way of thinking. Sometimes if you're stuck in like either an echo chamber or something that is, you know, the same kind of mindset that you're in every single day, removing yourself to a different space, it might be going for a really long walk. If I've got that time, it might be going home to see my mum and dad for a weekend. It might be, you know, going on a little holiday or a weekend away. I think having that time and space away from what you do is so valuable, because it allows you to like recalibrate and go, okay, there's more things going on in the world than running my company. And then you can come back to me and go, actually, I got inspiration from all these other different spaces that I wouldn't ordinarily have seen if not. So for me, I don't know about you, but I find inspiration from loads of different places, and sometimes I just need to remove myself from the day to day.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you next about your thoughts on toxic grind culture, especially as somebody who's self-employed. You feel like you have to be on it all the time, and you see like certain people with microphones on TikTok that only talk about how, like, you know, they get up at 5 a.m. and they're working straight away and they don't go to sleep, and like it's a lot. And when you go through the trough, essentially, you feel like, well, maybe I'm not doing enough, maybe I need to do more, like you were saying. So, you know, what do you think about toxic grind culture and how we use that to educate young people?
I think hustle culture is icky. Like, I hate it. Like, I do not believe that you should be working day and night, no matter whether you work for someone else or you work for yourself. I just don't think that's a healthy mindset that we should be living in. And I don't think any 20-something should be doing that, because there is more to your life than your career. Like at Talk 20s, we say that we have 4 different content pillars. One is finance and money. One is career and business. One is well-being and relationships. And one is fun and adventure. So therefore, career and business is 25% of the things that we focus on. There are three other things that are so important. So, you know, remind yourself, how's your mental health doing? How are things going with your relationships? That's not just your love life, but also with your friends and your connections and your family and stuff. You know, are you having fun? Are you enjoying yourself? Are you seeing the world? Are you doing things that make you happy? You know, and how do you feel financially as well at the same time? I think there's so much more to life than just what you're doing with your career. I see so many people in their 20s really, really stressed about that. Like, I've not quite made it in my career, but they might be doing other amazing stuff in other areas of their life, but they don't see that, because I think we place so much focus on hustle in your 20s. You've got to get to this point in your career because of X, Y, Z, and I hate that personally.
Yeah, it's that quote that always sticks in my head. It's like, in your 20s, you're building the table, and then for the rest of your life, that's not like that though, is it? Because when you look at certain people that have done really well, like, what's his name? Who's the guy that made KFC? Didn't make it until he was like 80 something.
Oh yeah. What's his name?
I can't remember the guy's name.
Yeah,
Colonel Sanders. Never made KFC until he was like in his 80s.
There's loads of people, like J.K. Rowling didn't write Harry Potter until I think she was in her 40s or something like that.
Yeah, and had loads of like rejections and things like that. So it's about like kind of learning to redirect yourself. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to like get on, like to talk about 20s Fest in particular?
No, not particularly, because it is pretty fresh, and like we're just about to sign the venue contract, and then we will be like pushing it out. So this is a nice little teaser. So
I know, I really wanted to know all the bits before, but
yeah,
you know, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I
don't want to say people are like who are like, you know, we're in conversation with, and then them not sign or whatever, and then people be like, I came for that.
Do you ever feel like there's a lot of pressure on you because of what you're doing?
Yeah. But sometimes I try and block it out. Like, I forget sometimes that like we'll put stuff on social media, and then people will see it, and then I'll see them like in person in a few weeks later, and they'll be like, and they'll relay the whole thing, and I'll be like, how do they know that about me? Oh wait, yeah, it was in a podcast, or I put it on my stories, and this and this and that. Like, I think we sometimes forget how many people are watching what we do, and like, yeah, I think it's quite overwhelming.
It's like you don't really think about certain things until someone points out to you.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel every time I see Talk 20s content. I'm like, oh, I'm being called out again. But that's like, it's a nice way, because again, when you were breaking down the 4 pillars, I never thought about life as that. For me, pre-COVID, it was always like 70, 80% work. And then when COVID hit, I was like, oh shit. Like when I lost my job, I was like, I don't have anything else. And I think that's why I hate school. I think we place too much of our identity around what we do for a career, when that is just a part of what we do. And our careers change over time, right? So that means our identity is constantly changing no matter what. I've been a teacher, I've been an event professional, and now I'm an entrepreneur and podcast host, like, and soon to be event company owner. Like,
our lives are ever changing and evolving, if you place too much emphasis on your career, then your identity is just always going to be fixed like that. And I think there's so much more to that than just what you do for work.
What's your relationship with like the education system now? Because I love what you guys do, but then it kind of like doesn't tell you that school's pointless, but pretty much says that what you learn in school isn't applicable necessarily to real life.
Yeah. So I'm quite open about this, but like we applied for Innovate UK funding for Twenties Fest.
Okay.
And it's like government funding. If anyone doesn't know what Innovate UK is, it's like government funding. And they push like either like 50k or something like that into different companies. And we didn't get it. But then I'm not surprised that we didn't get it, because we pretty much say like, government, you're letting us down in this kind of area and we need help with that. And like, it was not on their agenda necessarily to help young people in that way. And I'll probably get into a lot of trouble for saying this, but I don't think it's necessarily on their agenda to help young people with money, because the banks then benefit from us being rubbish with our money. Like it's not on their priority list to help young people with their mental health. Like you look at universities right now, they're trying to take away like hardly any blame for any kind of mental challenges that are faced by their students, up to the point where, you know, people are, you know, taking their own lives, and the universities want kind of no part in, oh, like we have a duty of care. Like there's so much that is like going wrong. And that's why that there is a need for a company like this to exist. But I think, yeah, we are pointing out the fact that like this stuff should be taught in school. But on the flip side, I also think that like if we were taught this stuff in school, would we have listened? Like I'm not sure I would have. I think I just
yeah that's true.
Would we have taken it in? Would it have been relevant? I think it's when you hit those challenges in your 20s, like for example, like if, you know, this won't be applicable for some people like who are London based, you know, you might not buy a house until you much later on in life. That might not be a priority for you. But if you're in the north, it's a lot easier to get onto the property ladder because the deposits are less and all that kind of stuff. But like, you're not going to want to learn about how to buy your first home when you're in secondary school. That's not helpful. But who teaches you that stuff when you actually get there? Even like it's even challenging speaking to even a mortgage advisor, because there's so much jargon there, and you don't know who to trust and who do you speak to this, because you know there's so much going on. So there is so much life skills that we feel like we need at different points in our lives, and there just isn't one place where you can do that. Like I would say that we're kind of a comparison to like what money saving expert, but with a Gen Z twist.
This is why I say to young people all the time about I find young people that aren't interested in politics icky for that reason, because that's why I feel like we get left behind, because we are not the target voter, or like because we don't help them win, they're not going to care. So that's why I think from a young age people should know about politics, because then we would have less of these issues and people would take us more seriously. But then that's just bad in Innovate UK for not even considering it as
to be fair, the feedback that we got back was super positive. Like they loved the whole idea. They were like, they thought it was amazing. They thought that the vision beyond what we were doing was great. Like there wasn't really a scrap of like negative feedback in there. One of the things was like, the feedback that we got was like, what if like core members of your team were to leave? I was like, that is a challenge for any single business. That is not an excuse to not allow us the funding. And also like there were statements in there like this would be a really good use of like government funding. Okay, great. If you've got that statement in there, well, why not give it to us? But I think the main probably reason is that the fund that we applied for was to help creative industries in particular, and 20s Fest is probably more of an all-rounded thing to help young people as opposed to just the creative industry. So I think there is that element, like the scopes weren't quite there, but it wasn't the first time that we've applied for Innovate UK. It was the second. So
not upset about it at all.
Not upset about it because when they see 20s Fest, they'll realise what they're missing out on.
Do you know what? I think you should just do a little stunt outside House of Parliament or outside the office with your like 20s Fest boards and stuff like that, and just remind them what they missed out on. Yeah. So I always ask guests similar final questions, and I kind of tweak it based on what they're talking about. So, you know, what would you say to people that have ever doubted your success based on the fact that you are a young person, or doubt anyone's success based on the fact that you're a young person?
Just because you're a young person, it doesn't mean that you don't know what you know. Like, have confidence in yourself and what you believe in, because I bet you there's rooms that you walk into that you actually do know more than the people around you. I think today we've just been at the podcast show in London, and I think I was really nervous about going to the podcast show in London because I was like, oh my god, it's gonna be all these podcast experts like going to a room, and I'm sat in these talks and I'm like, I actually know a lot of this information already. I'm like, I actually should have had more confidence in myself that I knew this. And I think that's the case for many young people. I think own the rooms that you go into, because you'll be surprised how much you do know, and how much your knowledge actually is relevant coming from the age that you are. I think we have a special uniqueness that we've got a different perspective on the world because of where we're at in our lives. Like, a younger perspective on everything is actually really valuable in a lot of companies. So like, don't dim your voice, speak up, and show what you think about the world, and share that with your colleagues and your loved ones and stuff like that, because I think it's really important that we do.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing a bit about your career. And I am going to be one of those people that comes to 20s first.
Please do.
Any excuse to go somewhere and have fun.
Yes.
So I'm really excited, and I can't wait to see what else you get up to. And yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I've loved it.
I had tattoo removal
session
yesterday, so now my arm is burning.
Is it okay?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think through the itchiness.